Hi, we're Alan and Patty Eckman, inventors of the Eckman Method of museum quality cast paper sculpture and co-founders of Eckman Fine Art Incorporated.
We've been creating sculptures in our medium since 1988 and have become internationally recognized as the premier artists working in the medium of paper sculpture.
In this 5 DVD class we call Your Molds and the Eckman Method, we will teach advanced artists working with molds to create ceramic sculptures, resin casts, and bronzes, how to recreate their work in higher detail with unique techniques that provide options like pedestal to relief and altered cast.
Watch this hard-hitting instruction and think about your molds and what you can do to embellish, alter, and recreate your work in lightweight, acid-free cast paper sculpture that is as strong and as hard as wood and leather. This piece behind us I call Taking the Bull with the Bow. It was recreated in our paper from the same molds that were used for the bronze. Only I was able to do this piece in much higher detail.
And you're going to see how Alan does this.
This is the piece you saw behind us, Taking the Bull with the Bow. And this is my original cast paper piece that I did from starter casts. I sculpted in this detail in the paper for the mold, which will then become what I call molded in detail for the bronze that you see here. Now this bird's eye view is of a pedestal piece I did from the same molds with fine detail, or actual detail as I call it. So where do you begin? With the paper. It starts with the paper soft sheets from number 1, which is the thinnest, like tissue, to number 6 sheets. And with our hard sheets, thin paper all the way up to board, which you can carve. Leather sheets and semi-hard paper for clothing and grass. And this is our pulp to cast with and to sculpt with. And the bonding agent, which fuses the paper fibers like heat does with metal. This is what I did. I did an original cast paper sculpture here on the right, and then I molded it to do this bronze. I took those molds and casted them in our pulp, and with our hard and soft acid-free paper I created all this detail you see on this piece, and I'm going to show you how I did that step by step. And here are the molds. That's the man, and here's the horse and the buffalo bull. Open that up. You can see I used this pink smooth on. I like to use that because when you cast, you can kind of tell how thick your cast is. It's not very important. Your molds might be white, but the foundries really don't like this pink smooth on because the wax doesn't stick to it very well, so they have to heat the molds. That tail on that buffalo, I'm not going to cast that, and also the tail on the horse and the ears. We're going to fabricate those separately. This is the buffalo skull, and we'll cast that later on, and the rider. Now the first thing we're going to do is cast the ground section. So let's get started. Here's my ground section, and these are some of the tools you'll need. This is your paper pulp in blanket form, and you'll need a dish with some water in it and a little sponge. This is the bonding agent, and I use that kind of thin here. You can see, and a couple of brushes will be handy. So we'll take the pulp out of the bag, spread it out on a waterproof surface. You want all of your tools, your surfaces, everything to be clean, because this is acid-free paper. You want your hands to be clean. I mean washed clean with soap and water. You don't want to have any acid anywhere, because it will turn your paper yellow. I'm going to first start by putting the pulp down on the molds after I've wet those molds with a little bonding agent, and then I press in the pulp into all those little nooks and crannies. Here are little burnishing tools that will help you do that. So I'm pushing it into what will be a rock on that mold, and I fill that completely. Just peel the pulp back. It comes off in layers and little blankets. Wet the mold with some bonding agent and brush it on, and you can use a burnisher to kind of press it in a little bit, smooth it on. This is a little block, which is a registration block for a mount, and I'm going to cast over that. I'm going to actually cut it off later, but I guess I really didn't need to cast that, but I want to show you how to cast everything. I don't know what you're casting, so I'm just going to go ahead and cast this whole thing, and I'll make my changes later. That's the advantages of this medium. It's very forgiving. You can make a lot of changes, a lot of alterations. You can see I kind of fold that paper over and make it thicker to press it into that rock crevice, that hole. It's not really a hole, it's more like a pocket where the rock is going to be formed, but the mold kind of makes it a pocket, because it's, of course, molds are negative and your positive areas are what we're casting here. So that'll be a rock. This is the edge of the mold. What I'm going to do is put this paper right up to the edge, kind of fold it over as I work my way around this mold. There's another rock, and I'll fill that, press it in. You want to try to get a consistent thickness on these casts, so try to pay attention to that. If it gets to be too thin, don't worry about it. You can always go in behind that cast after it's dry and make it thicker, but you want it thick enough to let it dry and then take it out of that mold and as one solid piece. So I'm working here on the edge and getting around the perimeter of this mold. Now you're going to want to know your molds and where the edges are, what to cast, what not to cast. If you don't cast something, that's not a big problem. If you cast something that shouldn't be casted, that's not a big problem either. But know your molds. It just kind of helps you save time. You want to get these casts about the same thickness as you would wax, about 3/16 of an inch up to 1/4 of an inch. That should be as thick as you want to go on it. But like I said, if you get it not thick enough or too thick, that's not a big issue either. Here I'm laying it in and working my way around this mold. You can kind of see I've got this this pulp kind of thick. It really will get thinner as it dries and dehydrates. The cast will get hard because of the bonding agent in it, and it will get thinner. Now I'm using a sponge and I'm kind of patting it down as I fill that mold. I will occasionally dip the sponge in the water to release some of the bonding agent that's in the sponge and to clean it a little bit. We're going to show you some different techniques in casting. Patty casts a little different than I do, and she's going to cast a horse, and you'll be able to see the differences between her casting techniques and mine. Basically, she's going to use the paper pulp blankets the same way I do, but there are other ways of casting, and we can talk about those. I'm going to show you some of those, but there has to be, I would say, over a dozen different ways of casting paper into molds. We use this paper pulp blanket technique because it's fast and it gives us a nice cast for our starter cast that we use to sculpt our original work with. But when you cast your pieces from your molds, you may want to try some other casting techniques, and I'm going to kind of describe some of those to you, and you could try those if you don't like the results that you're getting this way, because the casts really do vary in quality. The different nuances that you get can vary quite a bit with the different kinds of casting methods. You can use a method by which taking our paper pulp blankets and repulping those with more water in your kitchen blender, making patties, mixing the bonding agent as you cast those patties into your molds. Now here we have our drying technique. You can see I just have a fan. I've got the air blowing over this, and that'll dry pretty much overnight. Now this is the next morning and I'm taking the cast out of the mold. You're going to see the cast shrinks a little bit. You might find a little more wrinkles than are in your original mold, but that ground section is going to be just fine. I'm checking it to see where that paper is thick if it's dry. Usually those thicker parts don't dry all the way, so I'll lay it down and put the fan and dry the surface, which will take probably an hour or so, and it'll be thoroughly dry. But I'm just checking it all over here, and if perchance it's not dry all the way and a piece breaks off in your mold, let it dry in the mold and then take it out, and you can reattach it later, and you'll see how we do that. Now Patty's casting this horse, and you can see she's using her fingers more than I do, and she really uses her fingers a lot more than I do. So if you're inclined, you can use some latex gloves to protect your hands a little bit. The bonding agent is totally harmless and acid free, but it does have the ability to dry skin a little bit, and I don't like to wear gloves unless I'm really sculpting heavily in the pulp and using a lot of bonding agent. In the evening, I usually use a little hand cream by my nightstand, and I'll rub that on my hands just to put the moisture back in them. But it's pretty minor, and it's like I said, a harmless agent. You see Patty's kind of patting this cast now with the sponge. She applies her bonding agent a little different than I do, and it really depends on how much of that agent you put in the paper when you're casting, how hard that cast will be, and depending on how thick you make the paper, it can affect the drying. Pretty much it will dry overnight. Like I said, you can just flip it over if it's not dry all the way. It will release from your silicone molds very easily. I wouldn't do this with plaster molds. Latex molds work good. Even some fiberglass molds, especially if you use a mold release. Here she's painting that bonding agent into the leg of this horse. Now she's applying it to the blankets here, and then she's going to there, she's cleaning it a little bit. She's got a little speck in there, probably a piece of a mold. Now she kind of lays that, tore off a section kind of long like the leg is, and fills the hoof, and now she's laying another longer piece in. She will let some of that paper hang over the side, and you want to do that. It kind of helps with keep it in the mold. It doesn't shrink as much when you have a little laying over the side. And don't worry about waste, because anything you trim off of these casts, you can save that paper and repulp it and cast with it. You can do a lot of things with this repulped paper. You don't even have to repulp it as far as that goes. You can just put it in a container and put some water in it and kind of mush it up. At that point, it kind of is like working in clay. It models pretty well. Here she's working on another leg and filling that hoof. Like I said, we're not going to cast the ears or the tail on these animals. We'll do that later, and we'll be able to do it better, and you're going to see why as we progress. I just really like the technique Patty uses in her casting. She does a great job at casting. I don't cast as well, at least this pulp casting. When we get into sheet casting later, I'll show you how I do that, and I think Patty does as good a job at sheet casting as I do, but she does a lot better job at pulp casting than I do. She's just a star. She's great at casting. Yeah, she's a star. And she doesn't wear gloves, and she doesn't worry about her nails. Won't hurt those. I don't think you need to be that concerned about the job you do when you cast. As long as you get it all in that mold, you're going to get a nice cast, and it's something that's going to be usable as long as it's clean. As long as you keep everything clean, you don't have to worry too much. This is a very forgiving medium. You like to sculpt, and this medium gives you a lot of opportunity to do that. Here she's working on the other half of that horse. Tail is something she's not bothering with, like I've said a couple times before. You could cast the tail if you want to. I just don't. I like being able to change the pose on that tail and have a little different look, even on the same limited edition piece. And that's what this medium allows you to do, is to give yourself the opportunity to make a lot more changes and to really make your piece a limited edition original, much more than in the bronze lost wax method. Now, Patty has everything cast on this horse. It actually took her about 15 minutes to cast it. She's pretty fast. She said it's not a record, but she did it pretty fast. Now we're going to set it up for drying, and you notice that the molds, after they're cast, we leave them open so we can dry all that paper. And basically all you have to do is set it up so everything gets some air from a household fan. We like to use these low profile fans, the ones that just kind of set on a table, and you can get those almost anywhere in different sizes. Now I'm going to cast the buffalo, and I'm set up here pretty much the way Patty is, and I'm going to cast this a lot like she did. I'm putting the mother mold on the leg of that buffalo, and we have the molds all cleaned out, all the wax out of there. They're washed up. You can see there's wax all over the mother mold. It's just the fiberglass mother mold on this buffalo, but the inside is nice and clean. There's the animal. I just use rubber bands to hold the molds together, keep them clean inside. That way you don't have to wash them out each time after you've pulled the paper out of the mold, the finished cast. Close it up, and they'll stay nice and clean for the next time. And I'm just kind of doing the way she did it. I'm putting that paper in the mold. We think that the best way artists learn is by watching, and what we're doing in this series is showing you how we do things and telling you how we do it as you watch, and giving you a lot of information. And on the DVD, you'll notice that we have scene selection where you can skip past previous clips on these DVDs to go to where you want to get the information that relates to what you're doing at the time. So use those and refer back to what we did here as you're progressing through on your different sculptures and what you're working on at the time. It's always good to refresh yourself. You probably want to jump right in and do some casting, and that's fine. We're working on casting here, but we're going to move through this buffalo pretty fast. You saw how Patty did the horse, and now you're seeing how I'm doing this buffalo. Not a lot of difference, and the casts won't be too much different. I like to use this what I call my paddle burnisher, and it's one of our EFA tools that we manufacture. It's a nice handy tool. You probably need something like it, especially if you're working on larger things. There's the buffalo. You can see the tail, not the tail. I didn't cast that, and I didn't cast really that square piece down below right there. That's where I'm going to put a mount in. I'm going to show you some different techniques on mounting later on. Now I'm just going to open up this rider. You can see there's a lot of different parts to this mold. This is kind of a complicated mold. It goes together, and it's a small mold. And these smaller molds, I really like to do the sheet casting because they just turn out better. But I'm going to go ahead and pulp cast this. I'll sheet cast this even smaller mold with the buffalo mold later on. But I want to show you how you can really sculpt on and restore a bad cast. What I'm doing here is I'm filling the nose on the rider's face, and you want to when you cast, you really want to fill these areas and push the paper into it, either in sheets or in blankets like I'm doing here. Use that bonding agent and press it in and kind of mush it in there. Get a lot of it on there and just kind of paint it into the mold and press it in and press it in with the sponge. Get the cast thick enough. If you find a thin area after you've taken the cast out of the mold, just go ahead and lay some paper behind it on that dry cast and let it dry more. Sometimes, especially with those white molds, you can't really tell how thick it is. But like I said, it's a forgiving medium, and if you get it too thin, you can go ahead and add paper to the back as a sheet or the blanket. Okay, here's that buffalo mold. You see the hole there where it's a pore hole for wax, and a close-up on the mold. there's a lot of areas on molds that you don't cast. But if you do cast them, that's all right. You can recover that paper when you trim. Now I'm going to demonstrate sheet casting here on this buffalo skull. And basically you just take that paper. This is probably a number 3 or number 4 sheet. And I'll probably use both kinds on the casting here. And I just paint that bonding agent onto what I call a little ready sheet. I've torn several of these. I'm rolling it up, and I'm going to cast the teeth on this buffalo. So I've got it mushed up, and I press it in. This is a little plastic burnisher. It kind of flexes a little bit when I push it in, the paper I mean, and I really like these tools for casting smaller things. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to paint that bonding agent in, roll the paper over, fold it over, kind of roll it up and get it really saturated, and I'm going to lay it in on the other side. Now I'm painting in, these are thinner sheets, probably number 3 sheets. I could use 4, but I'll use 3 and 4 sheets on this casting. Here I'm tearing up just little pieces and trying to fit it in to the tiny part of this mold, and it's kind of tedious right here, but needs to be cast. If I miss places on a mold and don't get them cast, I just sculpt it in later. It's kind of like when you're chasing wax, or if you work in metal, where you have to go back in and sculpt. This is very much like working in bronze. A lot of the same techniques, it's just a different medium, that's all. And you can do more detail than you can with bronze. It's more forgiving than the metal is, and it's a lot easier to work with this, and you get great results. It's cleaner, it's lighter weight. I love metal. I like when we do the bronzes. It's just that the foundry does so much of it, and I go to the foundries and watch them, and I enjoy that, and I'll show some clips on that later on, working on this piece. But the paper is a medium I think you're really going to enjoy, and seeing when you've mastered this medium, you've really come a long way from any other kind of medium that you use in those molds, whether it's bronze or porcelain or resin cast that you're doing. You'll be able to take those molds and create some amazing things when you've mastered this. It's going to be a little different than any other medium that you're working on, but or working with. But if you enjoy sculpting and you enjoy creating beautiful things in a beautiful medium, you're going to like this. You can see I'm just kind of painting this these number 3 sheets, thinner sheets. There's number 4. I laid down a number 3, folded it over on the edge there, and I'm kind of using 3 and 4s here 3 maybe on the bottom, 4 on top, just to make it a little bit thicker as I progress through this, the top of the buffalo skull. And then for the horns, I'm bringing it down and folding it over. I've found that if you give yourself a little bit of paper that goes down into that top of that skull, rather than just fill the horn and then go down and fill in the rest of the skull, if you overlap it a little bit, and that's pretty much a technique I use in any kind of casting, is overlapping, so you don't have different parts of the cast that separate or break off when you remove it, especially if it's in a thin area where it could happen. But like I said, if you do break a cast, it's easy, very easy to reassemble it. And just watch the way I'm doing this, filling that mold. This is a very complicated mold. I think a buffalo skull is probably one of the most difficult things to sculpt originally. They're beautiful though. They have and in this medium it's really beautiful because it looks like bone. And there I'm filling in the bottom part. This is really an area, you can see that plastic furniture bend as I fill that area there. There's little holes in there, and I'm pushing the paper into those holes, painting it on. I'm working pretty fast. I still have to put the plug in for that pore hole there, so I'll get to that in a minute. But I like the buffalo skulls. I like the way they turn out. Every skull is different, just like everybody's face and is different. The buffalo skulls are all different too. They look the same. You can tell a buffalo skull from a cow skull easy enough. The anatomies are different enough, but between buffalo skulls, whether it's a cow or a bull or a young bull, a calf, an old bull, there are some changes. Now those were the eye socket, the top of the eye sockets I just cast, and I left it a little thin on the edge so I can join it to the top of the skull. I'll show you that when I assemble this. Now I'm rolling the paper up and I'm filling the horn section on both sides. Overlap it, fill it. That plastic furniture gives me a lot of spring when I'm filling these small molds. I really like that. And this will be very hard when I'm done. It'll be a good cast. I got that area there where I filled that plug hole, and that's going to be the back of the head, and kind of at the bottom of the skull. This is the top of the skull that I'm working on here, and you can see I'm kind of really getting it thick on the edges on the back of that skull, so it gives me a place to join the top and the bottom together. Now there's my buffalo skull, and I'm going to put that under the fan and dry that too. That's where the top of the eye is. You can see it's thinner there. There's a strategy behind that. you'll learn how to cast your molds. But this is one mold I'm not going to cast. It's the accessory mold. This is the rifle, the bow, arrows, the feathers, head feathers. This is my wax mold for all that fine detail that I'm not going to cast. I'm going to sculpt those out. There you can see the wax in that mold. It's the other half. Okay, let's take the buffalo cast out. It's all dry. So we'll remove the cast and do our trim and assembly. I'm going to show you how to assemble these casts. And that's one of the front forelegs. You can see it's bent because he's running. Go underneath, it'll be the inside. And this is the back legs. The insides of the back legs. All this will be trimmed off. We want to go around the perimeter of our cast and use scissors or a knife, X-Acto knife, to trim them. That little piece there, I didn't cast that, but like I said, that's not a problem. So I'm just using scissors and knives and taking off all the excess. I've got a pad here under my X-Acto knife. I'm laying this cast down and cutting against it. It's black silicone on foam board, black foam board. It protects my knife so I don't dull my blades so much. And it's black because I use black background. It kind of separates everything so you can see it better, keeps it simple. And every once in a while that silicone on that pad shows up in my paper and I got to pick it out, but no big deal. You can see how thick that cast is, and I'm using a combination of scissors and knife, different kinds of scissors. I use any tool I can to get the trim off of there. Now I'm fitting these together. I'm trying to register the cast together, seeing what I have to do. This area here got cast and it shouldn't have, so I'm going to take that out. And I save all the trim. There's some of that black pad, silicone pad that I cut against. Save all your trim. You'll be able to use that later. You can cast with it or repulp it. It's got a lot of uses. It's kind of like the metal in a foundry. If they get a bad cast, they'll just melt it down again and use it. There's the other half of the buffalo. And you can watch how I do this. When you cut with a knife like this, never cut toward you. You can that knife will come off that paper so fast, and it will go into you. And I can tell you some horror stories about how I learned not to do that. Basically, what I say when I'm cutting is, my job is not to cut myself. And that reminds me to be careful, to cut down and away, not toward me. This is the leg that I'm going to put a mount in. He's on one leg, so is the horse, and that's not an easy thing to do. But I'm going to show you some techniques on mounting that become useful. So I'm fitting this leg on the inside of the cast. This is the left side of the buffalo cast. You see it's kind of thin there, it's a little bendy, so I'll put a piece of paper on that and sculpt, chase over it to make that cast a little thicker. I'm trimming off a little extra there and getting this all trimmed off. Now this is a 3/8 inch threaded steel mount that I'm going to put in here. I'm kind of there's a nut that'll fit on that, although I'm not going to use it, and a washer. I'll use a wing nut instead, but making sure that washer will give me a base to that hoof there. Now what I'm going to do is put this in a vise and bend it. Because it's 3/8 of an inch, I can bend it. It's not easy, but I can bend it, and I'll bend it several times, trying it, making sure it kind of fits inside that leg where the leg bends, and get it going both ways. The 3/8 inch steel is about the thickest you're going to be able to bend in a vise. If you want to get it thicker, you can heat bend it. Heat really helps, but you might want to take it to someone to have that done. Just give them a template and have them bend to it. I've done that before. Now I'm going to get that into that leg. I've cut off the bottom, giving myself room for the mount. That's about as far as I want that to extend out the bottom of that hoof. Now I'm seeing where I want to cut a little more off, just to give it some more space to make it big enough that steel is going to fit inside that leg. This is going to be a real strong mount when I'm done. And there's the washer, and making sure I got everything the way I want it before I seat that steel inside the cast. Now this is thicker paper. This is a number 5 sheet, and my yellow container is the bonding agent that's thinner. The blue, I have a little thicker bonding agent. And as a general rule, the thicker the paper, the thinner the bonding agent. So I'm basically just filling in using our paper torn into ready sheets, and I'm gonna just stick it down up there to keep it from moving as I fill in around this bar. I could use Pulp for this. Pulp already has water in it, and I want it to really be hard, and so I'm just going to use sheets and my bonding agent. This will give me a harder sculpture inside this cast. It's just going to be a stronger way to do this. So, and I'm not going real fast. I'm watching what I'm doing. I'm making sure I'm getting it filled in underneath that bar where there's kind of hollow spaces. I want this to be pretty solid when I'm done. And it will be very solid and very strong, especially on this side where I'm putting that bar in. And then when I register the other half of the leg onto this, I can add some more, and you'll see that when I do this. But I'm going to really use this paper and fill in under that bar and get those hollow spaces with that thick paper. And this is a little thinner paper here, but I'm using it more or less to diffuse the thicker paper to the side of that cast. And it's going to hold it there. The paper doesn't really glue, it fuses, it sort of melts down, and very much like heat does with metal. And I'm pushing it underneath that bar. I don't want that bar to move. I don't want, and you see I took it all the way up into the back of that buffalo because of the front half is really hanging over a lot. It's just going to be mounted on that leg. I put a 3/8 inch bar in there so it won't move. It's going to be plenty strong for a pedestal piece, which I can do, but I'm not sure whether I'm going to use this as a pedestal piece or a wall hanging at this point, because I have that option. Before I dry this, I'm going to make sure I've got it the way I want it. So I'll put the dry cast over the outside leg. The inside leg is totally dry. Where I fit it over top, I'm going to put a little more paper on there. We're really working on the right side of the buffalo here, the right half, and of course you're looking at the inside of the buffalo. Now I've got a lot of paper. I'm just gonna really get this mushy, and I'm gonna fill in. It's going to be like wood when I'm done. When that dries, it's going to be very, very hard. And use my burnisher to finish up, and then I'm going to dry that cast, and I'm going to make sure it gets good and dry before I mount it. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and register the legs on the left side of the buffalo. And what I'm doing is wetting the lip, just the perimeter of the cast. And again, you're looking at the inside of the buffalo. I'm sure you realize that, and I'm doing the same thing to the other half. Animals usually come in 6 halves. You have the 2 sides of the animal, with the legs, and then the inside of the legs will come in sections, so you'll have 4 of those. Now I'm registering after I got it wet. I'm fitting this together as good as I can, and I'm going to use, these are those gold deck screws that you can buy in any hardware store, and I've got a screwdriver, just a little handhold battery operated screwdriver. It's got little flashlight batteries in it with a Phillips head, and try to find that head, and I'm going to drive that screw through the paper. Now this is really important information here. Do not try to drive a screw through wet paper. That's why you wet the perimeter. Don't wet it inside. If you try to drive a screw through wet paper, it'll just knot up on one end. The paper will knot up on the tip of that screw, and you won't be able to go anywhere with it. Okay, down this end, I'm going to use a dressmaker pin, and I'm going to use needle nose to help me do that. And I grab the pin low and push it through so I don't bend the pin. And then when I remove the pin later on, I will use the needle nose, grabbing it at the head and squeezing it to pull the pin out so I don't pull the head off the pin with my fingers. Notice all these screws are going in on the outside of the buffalo, because if I put the screws on the inside, it's hard to get the screws out between those legs when it's all assembled, and you'll see what I'm talking about later. I'm using a straight edge and tearing these strips. These are going to be seam strips of number 3 and number 4 sheets, and I just paint it on. The bonding agent is painted on, and then I use a burnisher to burnish it on, and this will seam that leg together. And I'll do this to seam every cast together. We'll use our paper to do that. The paper will melt in and fuse and hold those casts together seamlessly, because you can just burnish and sculpt it and it smooths out all the way around that leg. Take my ready sheets, and I'm going to put a bottom on that little hoof there. Now again, around the perimeters, just don't get it in the inside of that cast where you might drive a screw, and around the edge here. And again, I'm going to move to the outside of the buffalo. This is the inside of his legs, between his legs. Register that. The thing about the paper is you can bend it, and you can cut it easily if you've got an area that's not fitting together the way you want. Just to get these casts registered as good as you can, making sure they're not too tight. You got to look at your thicknesses, your gaps you can fill. If you get it if you get it screwed together too tight and it gets too thin, you can always add more paper and sculpt it in on the outside. But I like to try to get this the way it should look. And what I'm doing here is I'm really working it. It looks frustrating, but I'm trying to get that bonding agent to soak into the paper while I'm working it around there. And it's a method to where it helps me. The paper will relax, and I can register them together easier if I just kind of work it in my hands a little bit. And you can see I've got some little gaps there, but I'm not going to worry about those. I can seam those together. But the screws are going on from the outside. And now on the inside of the cast, I can put some paper, paint that on there, burnish it on, and get it from the inside to make it nice and strong there. And there I'm seaming it on the outside of the cast, using the ready sheets. And I'm going to fold that over on the inside, and that'll make it even stronger there. And you can kind of paint these ready sheets in the hard areas to seam them, and use your burnisher to get the edges of the cast the way you want. I just want to make sure that it's seamed all the way around, and it is as smooth as I can get it afterwards. That's pretty good. I can hit it with the burnisher and smooth it more. But there's the cast. Fill in this area here on the inside. Now that's finished. There's the mount getting dried, and then I'll dry the side that I just worked on. Now we've got everything dry, and there's the mount leg, and I'm going to actually go ahead and register the front legs together before I put that on. I could have done it before now, but I didn't want to because I had to do so much work on that mount. I just thought it'd be more prudent to wait. Now I'm going to put a sheetrock screw through this hoof. It's a black one. I don't like using the black screws so much. I'd rather use the gold ones, but that one was black. I would recommend the gold. Now we'll put that together and go around that. Now these screws, they do have a little oil on them, and it's better to wash them or drive them through some a piece of board or something, get the metal off of them and the oil. Otherwise it leaves a little black in your hole, and then you have to clean that out with a knife when you remove them. Now I'm working this bonding agent around the perimeter, and I'm going to put a little paper in too, especially down there by the hoof. A little more paper. This will help me seat that other half of the leg. It'll tend to start fusing it and give me a little ability for it to stick together. It kind of squishes out a little bit and gives me something to work with to help me seam these casts together. I was careful to try to find some dry places, and sometimes if you're wet like this, it's better to you can see it's kind of pushing out. I did get through it okay, and it's sucking back together. Sometimes what I'll do is use an awl and get it started that way, but there's a lot of wet paper under and between these casts. Even though I dried the mound in, I still put a lot of bonding agent on there, and you can see that one screw, it's got paper wrapped around it. Okay, I'm going to finish and this part right here of his anatomy needs a little thickness. This buffalo cast, when I put it together, is going to be a little thinner than I want it to be, but I'll deal with that, and I'll show you how I'm going to deal with that. That often happens on animals if you don't bend the paper and get it as round as you want it. Now I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. I've got that perimeter all wet, and I'm going to take the two casts. Both of them have been dried, and the legs are dried, and I'm going to put screws in, and you can see I have different lengths of screws there. I used an awl to get that started, and I'm putting the screws all the way through to register. Now that back part didn't get cast, and underneath there I might have cut away too much too, but that's okay because we can fill that easy enough. Now I'm putting a screw through the back. You just got to try to register as well as you can. You can see it's thinner than I want it to be, so now I'm trying to push it and swell it out a little bit and get it a little bit fatter. For a big bull, he's a little thinner than I want him to be, but it's not too bad. Now I've got them screwed together, registered pretty good. You can actually even move it even though you have it screwed together. You can take it, and I'm gonna try to register the head a little bit better. The paper, kind of like metal, it has a mind of its own, and sometimes you got to make it mind. You have to almost know what it's going to do. before it does it, and then you'll learn this medium. You'll learn how to outthink the paper. Open it up a little bit there and push it in. Get him a little. That will make him a little fatter. I just needed to fold that paper under there and try to find an edge that will give me the thickness that I want. There's a lot of torque on it because of all those screws in there. Now I'm going to use some thicker sheets, number 4, number 5 sheets, to fill in and to seam these casts together. I'm spending a lot of time on this buffalo for techniques of trim and assembly. Won't spend as much time on the other casts when we get to this point, but I do want to show you some things that we do a little different on some of those casts. This buffalo has some unique things that the other ones don't have. One of them is these big gaps at the bottom of it, and this paper that I'm tearing up is really super thick paper. It's our number 6 sheets, and I'm tearing off some really large ready sheets, painted both sides. I will take that number 6 sheet and lay it in where these big gaps are. And right here you can see it really forms well around the body of that buffalo. Down below where there's a big hole, I will cover that too. But first what I'm going to do is kind of fold it into that hole and get it to stick to both sides, and then I can kind of fill in and sculpt in the rest of it with some more of these sheets. Again, I'm using this bonding agent fairly thin here, and I'm now forming it over. When I lay one sheet on top of another, that's going to be really strong and really thick there. It'll be almost or just as thick as the cast when I'm done. And sculpting it in, it will be seamless. That's what I'm doing here. I'm actually sculpting. I'm going to be showing you some sculpting techniques in a little while, but in this stage of the assembly, this is actually sculpting. I'm tearing that sheet to fill in some of these and folding it over itself just to make it a little thicker. But what I did was I painted it on there first, and then I folded it over and tore it and to make a nice thick pad to fill in there. The more of this you do, the better you're going to get at it. It is just like working with clay at this point. The paper softens up and you can move it around a lot like clay. Here I'm using my hands to form it in around the back of this buffalo. It seams it as well as sculpts it in a little bit. It slipped off of there. Paint a little more on just to get it to stick. I really didn't have it soaked in well enough for it to be laid on there and to stay on when I burnish it. Forming the back end of this buffalo with that sheet of paper, as well as seaming it together. Now, the casts, like I said, are kind of rough. but we're going to go over the whole cast anyway and chase it all out. And that it really isn't very difficult or time consuming to do that. But that's really in the sculpting part of the DVD set. Here I got a little gap. The registration looks like one cast is a little didn't shrink as much as the other, so there's a little separation there. But I can deal with that. I can either cut it away or go over it or form it any way I want in seaming this together. I choose to just go over it here, just folding it over and making it thicker. I just really wanted it to be thicker on that hump, give it a little more weight. So what I'm going to do is add to that in a little while here after I get the head seamed together. I can still kind of push it and form it and register a little bit better. See, even though it's screwed together, it's all pretty wet, and I can move things. These sheets here are number 3 sheets that I'm putting on. I want to be able to burnish it down, burnish that seam down a little flatter. So I'll use a little thinner sheet there. And at this point I'm sculpting a little bit to smooth the back end of this buffalo and to get it shaped the way I want. Just take my brush and paint it on. Now I'm using some bigger sheets here to, even though I have it seamed, I just want to smooth some of that back in ahead of time. While I'm here, I might as well get this done. I'm just really just kind of chasing part of this out smooth. I'm getting ready to put this in and dry it now. Okay, we got it dry. I'm going to take a screw out where the leg is that I'm going to mount to this acrylic box that we make. It's just a temporary mounting surface so I can work on it. I'm going to seal this stainless steel washer onto the bottom of the hoof. It'll give me a good flat base to that hoof, so when I mount it on that acrylic box to work on it, it's going to be nice and firm. So I take a number 3 sheet and I kind of fill in under that washer and around over it and between the hoof and the washer, just sculpting it in basically. Put it right there and fill that gap, and work that paper around that hoof just to basically get it roughed in. I even here I'm putting a little paper underneath just to lock that washer into that sculpture. It's not really the armature like the metal rod, but it does give me steel there, and a good strong stainless steel, clean base under that hoof. And then work around it with a burnisher and get it flat the way I want. I've got a hole drilled, the right size hole in my acrylic, and I'm going to go ahead and mount that now. I've got some 1/2-inch PVC with the same size hole as that acrylic box that I'm going to use as sleeves, and that thickness with 2 of them it'll form that bend. I got a little bend in that threaded steel, and it'll form to it. It makes it a little stronger. And I've got the wing nut underneath to hold it all in place, and I can tighten that down. Kinda not a whole lot, but enough to get some of these screws out, and then when it dries I can tighten it down a little more. It's a little mushy to try to tighten it down too much at this point. But I can also sculpt around that. I'm going to make sure I have plenty of paper around that so I can sculpt it. It's going to be a little bigger than the other hoofs right now, but when that paper dries I can cut it away and kind of carve it and sculpt it to be the same size as the other hoofs. And I'll show you how to get all those hoofs the same size. Get into sculpting. But right now I'm going to form it around here and get it the way I want it, and then I'll dry that. Now let's assemble this horse. This is a horse that Patty cast, and you can see her cast has got some wrinkles in it, just like my buffalo. Probably not as many because she casts better than I do. But I'll go around this, trimming it out with a pair of scissors and with my X-Acto knife. When you put a new blade in an X-Acto knife, wipe it off. They have a little oil on them. Show you that again, just wipe it off with a paper towel. And you do want to keep them sharp. This is what I do. I just save all these trimmings, and I've got bags of them in the studio. I use those from time to time for different things. Basically, you saw me do this with the buffalo. We're going to go around the perimeter. I'm using the bonding agent fairly thin. It kind of soaks in on those edges, so you can register those edges easily. Then I screw them together from the outside. Go slow. You may notice there's a difference between the thickness of Patty's cast and mine. Mine, I just did a little thicker, but doesn't really make any difference. I guess I made it a little thicker because it's just a bigger sculpture. And this is going together pretty well. Getting 3 screws, 4 screws in that back leg. Now this is where this leg will mount just like the buffalo, but I'm going to mount this different than I did the buffalo. I'm going to show you a different way of mounting the horse than with the buffalo. You see that's hollow in the bottom of that hoof there, and I'm going to fill that. I want to make that pretty solid paper. Sometimes I'll get it up into the leg even heavier and thicker if I'm going to just mount it without steel inside there. All the way up to the head. Choose your screws long enough and make sure you don't screw your hand when you come through. You can see there's a big gap at the top. That's because I didn't cast the main. But I'll sculpt that in on the top of his head. And don't worry about the holes that you're putting in here. They're very easy to take care of. It's just that if you use a screw that's got oil on it, you're going to have a black hole when you pull the screws out. So you're going to want to clean your screws first, or clean out the hole if you've got black in there. Ream it out with an X-Acto knife. Getting my ready strips to seam with. Get my burnishers ready. And my water. This is how I used to leave my brushes in the water. We sell these brushes too. They're short brushes and they have a flat end. They're really nice. There's a number of them, and they don't get in your way with that short handle when you're working, and you can let them set in that water. Now I'm getting this neck portion where the mane will go. This paper here I'm going to use to fill in the top of the head that didn't get cast. I'm working in with my fingers and burnish over that. And getting the head completely seamed. I guess I have an underneath portion, kind of like I did that buffalo. And there's a part, this is going to be a stallion. And right now he's a she. So I'm going to make him a he and give him all of his anatomy when I sculpt him in. Right now I'm just sealing the back of this, seaming it up and getting it sculpted in. And this is the bottom of the hoof. I want to fill that. I just mush it all up and like it's a piece of clay now, and push it in. Burnish it off. That's where my mount's going to go. He's on one leg, and that's what that's looking like now, and that's ready to dry. We'll just put it on the drying stand and dry that horse. And while that's drying, let's move to the rider. And I wanted to kind of put a bow in his hand, so I'm sculpting that in. This is a piece of paper that kind of tore off in the mold, So I'm going to reattach it just by wetting it and pushing it on, and then I'll dry that. And here's my rider. I'm going to cut off this these straps that got casted, because I'm going to sculpt those on separately. You can see how rough this cast is. That's because I did it with Pulp. This is the bottom of the rider, the back of his legs, and his saddle portion. This is his arm. He's going to be holding a bow, and that's the arm that he holds the arrow. Saved my scraps, got them all trimmed out, put it in my scrap bucket. The assembly on this, I'm going to use a combination of screws and tape. So I'm getting some tape strips here ready. This masking tape is too fat, so I'm just making it a little thinner. And I'm going to mass part of these casts together. And when I seam it, I'll seam around the masking tape, and then after I take the tape off, I'll finish seaming that. I've got it wet, and I'm kind of working it in as I push this together, and got it registered pretty well. So now I'm just going to take some tape to hold that together there at the wrist, and the upper portion I'm going to use a screw. Again, I got it on the outside. And when I put the whole thing together, I don't want to have to deal with the screw. Now I'm going to start seaming this arm. Get that done rather than putting it all together and start seaming. I'll seam as I go. That's probably a bigger brush than I need for applying the bonding agent. Get it registered right through his head. I'm putting a screw. And through his body, a bigger screw. And I missed my finger. I hate it when I put screws through my finger. Okay, now I'm going to tape this hand together and arm. And this part of the body I'm going to start seaming and getting that shoulder, where that shoulder and that arm came together. That's a difficult area that is going to need to be a little sculpting done. You can see I got some gaps, not a big deal. Work around that finger that came off, where he's going to be holding the bow, and this other area where the arm is missing. I'm going to not put that arm on him. In fact, at some point I'm going to remove the other arm when I start sculpting on its face, because they get in the way and they're easy enough to take off and put on again. Now I'm going to register the bottom part together, and because the paper is wet and pliable, I can really move things around and get that cast even though it's a flimsy cast for the back of it and the bottom of his feet, I've got it all wet, and I can just work it and work it and work it until it all fits together. Because what happens is the bonding agent relaxes the paper as you're working this. And because this is really kind of a complicated cast to get together, I put more on than normally. And I got that saddle, I got the bottom part and the top part. I could have just cut that off and sculpted part of it in. Probably the bottom, just cut it off and then put the legs on and not have to deal with that. I chose to just keep it all together so you could see how you can do that kind of thing. Basically, the saddle isn't real thick, it's just leather on this Indian saddle. And I could have done that with a leather sheet, sculpted it in, but I wanted to use the whole cast. Combination of tape and screws to get that all together, because it was really a complicated area and not a big cast either. So now I'm going to do the seaming and seam it around those tape. I don't want to cover the masking tape. I'll just leave that exposed, and after it's all dry, the cast, after I'm finished working on it and I dry it, then I'll remove that masking tape. So I got little ready sheets, and I'm using those ready sheets that makes sense. I'll use the long ones where I have a long place to cover, and short ones where it's short. I want to open up this hole here, and you can see I got a hole in the arm. Of course, they're all hollow. Now we got the rider drying with the horse. So we can start on this buffalo skull cast now, and I'm going to trim it all out, and then I'm going to apply the bonding agent. This is the eyes section there that will go to the top of the skull, and work my way around the inside of this cast on the horns and all around that perimeter, and let it soak in a little bit. And I'm going to do the same with this. I'm even going to put some on the outside because I want it to bend, because I'm going to not screw this together. I'm going to just pull the top apart, top part of the skull, let it bend a little bit so I can bend the underneath part, the bottom of the skull, into it. And then where those eyes were cast, the eye section of the inside, I'm just going to seal that to the top of the skull to create that brain cavity inside. And then again, I'm going to relax the memory of this paper by working it and letting that bonding agent work for me. I'm going to get this eye now with my burnisher. Got the right size burnisher, and then having the right tools and knowing what kind of burnishers to use where is something you'll learn. Now I'm pushing this skull together and getting it just to seal itself. Then I can do a little seaming and filling in some of these gaps. little piece of paper there, some ready sheets, number 3s. That's what I'm using here. And then I'll burnish those. And I'm going to sculpt in a little paper here because it's a little pushed in and I want it symmetrical to the other side. And then we'll dry it. Now we've completed this lesson on casting, trim, and assembly. So please insert Disc 2, Your Molds, and the Eckman Method, Chasing and Sculpting.